Hello everybody, my name is Caden. Welcome back to my workshop. This is part 4 of making a sword, and I'm just going to get straight into it because I don't have much to say now. We're going to start shaping the guard first.
So my first step for this one is to basically finalize the shape of the guard. I've got a 36 grit belt on the grinder, hogging some material off the sides, tapering them, and just making sure that guard shape is exactly how I want it. So once I was happy with the shape and the finish of the guard, I moved on to my top spacer. In the design that I drew, I have a groove in the top spacer, so I'm just cutting that groove in, starting with a triangle file to sort of cut a line, and then I move on to a round file to cut in the final shape of the groove. Once that groove was all the way around the spacer and it's fairly even, I moved to some sandpaper just to smooth it out, get all those rough file scratches in there. I think I took it up to 1,000 grit before I called it done.
So now that I have the top spacer shaped, the handle block on, I'm going to shape the bottom spacer. And the reason why I'm not shaping the wood and then the bottom spacer is because if I shape the bottom spacer, I can then kind of match the wood to the bottom spacer. It seems like I could just match the bottom spacer to the wood, but I don't know. In my brain, it's easier to match the metal part, or the wood part to the metal part. So I'm going to do the bottom spacer, then we're going to work on the wood, and then I'm still waiting on the material for the pommel, so I might have to pause it for now, but yeah, we're just going to get started on the bottom spacer.
At this point in the build, I was just really excited about getting it finished, so I decided not to film a segment in between of me talking. So this is me starting the pommel. I am drilling a series of holes. We've got the first hole, which the tang passes through, and then the second hole is in the back of the pommel for the pommel nut to go into, and it kind of tightens down onto the pommel. This is me parting off the pommel. In a second, you'll see the tool doesn't quite reach, so I end up grabbing an angle grinder, and I just angle grind it off, and that worked pretty well. So the next step for the pommel is to mill out a little rectangular slot. This is where the end of the tang is going to fit into, or at least the end of the rectangular portion of the tang. In the next clip, I'll be grinding the tang round so that I can thread it, but I want the pommel to indicate nicely on the handle without twisting, so I'm milling out this little rectangular slot.
So now that we've got the pommel milled out and drilled with the lathe, I'm going to change the shape of the tang a little bit. So we've got these two sections. The section in between these two lines needs to be rounded a little bit more, but it's still going to be sort of a rectangle with rounded corners. Above that second line, so from here to here, we need this to be fully round. Basically just need a 6mm diameter round rod, because we're going to be threading that, and that's going to be how we fully attach everything together. So I'm going to get that done, and then we'll get back to work on the pommel. So I've taken the pommel off the lathe, and what I'm going to do now is cut in some facets along this top portion. You can see I've got these layout lines here. Basically what I want to do is have a ridge on each of the lines and a flat in between them. So I'm just going to do that on the grinder. Going to be very carefully grinding each little flat, trying to keep it as consistent as possible. Once I've done that, we're going to throw it back in the lathe, try to smooth out any bits along here just with some sandpaper, and then we're going to part it off, and that will be our pommel pretty much done. So I've parted the pommel off. We've got it to the correct length, got all the facets in. I think it's looking really cool. Only thing left to do on this is to make the end that joins up to the handle an oval, so it needs to match the back spacer on the handle. I'm going to do that on the grinder. Going to try to blend it in, make it look as seamless as possible. Once I'm done with that, then we're going to start on the pommel nut.
So in this next part, I'm basically just cutting the tang a little shorter because it sticks out past the pommel, and I need it to sit inside the pommel so that the pommel nut can screw down on top of it. And that will be what tightens everything together. This part is the pommel nut, so I've just stuck a piece of steel in the lathe, drilling out the first hole, and I like to drill out the hole and do the tapping before I shape the pommel nut, just because sometimes the tap can actually expand the steel and it ends up being too tight. So I do the tapping before, and then I turn it down to size once I've got the threads in there. So now that we've got the pommel nut turned down to size, I'm just center punching a little dot, and I'm going to drill a hole straight through it. And this is how we're going to actually be able to tighten the pommel nut. You can stick a drill bit through that hole and tighten it down. You'll see in a minute. Now that we've got the hole in it, I've just stuck it back in the lathe, and we're going to round over the back so it looks all pretty, because this is actually going to stick slightly outside of the pommel.
So the pommel nut is now done, and the pommel is also now done. We've got a nice oval pommel that matches up to the bottom spacer on the handle, and the pommel nut fits really satisfyingly in there like that. Another thing about the pommel nut, it has a little hole in it. That hole is so that you can slide a drill bit through and tighten the pommel nut down onto the tang, adjusting the tension as you need. It makes it just a really nice, easy way to take it apart, and it doesn't look like a sort of out of place screw or something like that. So I'm going to set that aside now. That's all done, ready for its final finish. I'm going to jump back onto the wooden portion of the handle. This needs to be hand sanded, keeping that line nice and crisp, putting its final polish on it. And then I also need to heirloom or slightly round off the corners of the handle so that it matches up really nicely to the top spacer and the bottom spacer. So I'm going to get started on that. So I am going to light the forge, and we're going to throw these two pieces in, and that will texture them. So I'm going to get a nice buildup of scale, and then I'm going to wire brush that scale off, and hopefully we'll have a nice like forged texture on these two pieces. And I think it's going to add a decent amount of character to the piece. So I'm going to throw these in, and then we'll see how the texturing goes.
So this is a process you want to do quite a few times before you really get the texture that you're looking for. So I'm throwing it back in, letting it get nice and yellow again, and then give it a good wire brush, and that sort of knocks off some of the loose scale that's on there. So here I'm just trying a couple more things to get some of the loose scale off. Wire brush on an angle grinder clamped in the vise, just you can see all those sparks coming off, that's a bunch of scale. And then I will put it in some acid to try to dissolve anything that's left over.
So I've taken the guard and pommel out of the acid, and they're looking cool. I like the texture on them, but they're not quite what I was thinking. So what I'm going to do instead is heat them up to like a blue color. Then I'm going to put some oil on them, and that should make them go really, really dark, and I think that'll look more intentional than this. On one of the sides of this, there's just some scale that's sort of hanging on. It doesn't look super intentional, like all these little bits of scale here. So what I'm going to do, heat them up, put some oil on them, and that should make it look a lot better.
So we're coming down to the last few steps. This step is putting my maker's mark into the sword. So we've got a little vinyl stencil that says Nedfly. I've just masked it off. Now I'm putting some salt water on it, and you can see that's the negative electrode there, and it's just using electricity to etch my mark into the blade. So now we've got a little curveball right at the end. The blade and all the steel colored parts are actually going to be blued, so that's what I'm doing here, just getting some gun blue, bluing them, and then we'll rinse them off, and yeah, they'll be all dark and cool. So the results of the bluing on the little pieces was great. When I came to do the blade, cleaned it off, got all the oils off of it, and started bluing it, and it worked really well. You can see the color goes on there real quick. And this is an acid, so it's actually etching the blade this color. It's not like paint or anything. But the results of me sort of scrubbing it back and forth like this were a couple weird spots. You can see one near the end of the fuller there. What I should have done was just taken long passes. I ended up redoing it, just doing long passes over the entire blade, and that worked great.
And with that, the sword is complete. I absolutely loved building this thing. I think it turned out really, really well. Let me know how you think it turned out. I can't decide whether I like it more after the bluing or before. Before the bluing, it was just sort of a classic sword. But after the bluing, it has this character that I don't think it had before. And yeah, I really, really like it both ways. I'm going to cut to some close-ups in a second, just so you can see it a little better. But yeah, I also wanted to mention I did some voiceover stuff in this video. If you liked that, let me know, just because I personally enjoyed it a lot more. I think the audio quality is a lot better, and it sort of didn't break up the build flow because I didn't have to stop, record, think about what I was going to say, do multiple takes. Yeah, so I just enjoyed it a lot more. If you guys liked it, let me know, and I will continue to do that. Otherwise, I will continue with my normal stuff. So I'm going to cut to some close-ups and a couple videos of us chopping some milk bottles with it. But otherwise, that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.